Under the Skin is a 2013 science fiction film adaptation of the 2000 novel by Michael Faber, written and directed by Jonathan Glazer and starring Scarlett Johansson.
So you live alone?
Yes.
You think I'm pretty?
I know, gorgeous.
You don't want to wake up, do you?
So Under the Skin is Species, but directed by David Lynch and Stanley Kubrick. So thanks for watching, everyone, and we'll see you next time. With all the oversimplification jokes aside, this film does have a very easy to follow and surface level plot. What makes this special is the vehicle of delivery and the tone and mood. This is Jonathan Glazer's third film after he made Sexy Beast and Birth, both to varying degrees of success critically, not so much financially. This film, unfortunately, was a box office catastrophe. They went through a lot of actresses, including Olivia Wilde. Glazer also stated that Scarlett Johansson was always his first pick. The studio liked it because she had a big name at the time. This is coming off, the Avenger movies. Her name was starting to become synonymous as a box office commodity. Unfortunately, that didn't save this film financially, only earning $7.3 million of its $13.3 million budget back, in spite of being just a critical darling and featuring a career-defining role from Scarlett Johansson. So most movies, after I watch them, I tend to jump on and see what other people and fellow critics think about a film. Rarely, certain films, I just like to absorb and kind of keep my own interpretation of what I've just seen kind of unmolested by other opinions and biases. And Under the Skin is definitely one of those films. This is not some abstract Gaspar Noé film. It's definitely clear in what it's trying to say with the overarching message, but it's the scene-by-scene nuances that Glazer and Johansson capture and display so well that keeps your interest peaked throughout the runtime. Johansson barely speaks in this film. It's like the polar opposite of her roles in Her and A Marriage Story. This feels more of a callback to her brilliance from Lost in Translation. She can tell you so much about her character's thought process with her expressions or timing of her movements in this film. Like, there's so many scenes of the camera kind of tight on her face, and it will go on for a while, and there's no dialogue and nothing really going on except for an incredible score and sound design, which we'll get to later. You kind of get lost in her thoughts, the way that you would kind of get lost in your own thoughts when you're driving down a road with an agenda. Like, you have a baseline to what she's thinking. She has a mission, and you know what she's looking for.
Do you want to live? Aye, why not?
However, as the story goes on, you know that those thoughts and those goals, so to speak, become a little bit muddy and muddled as the movie progresses. We're going to go into complete spoilers of this film, so please, if you haven't seen it yet, stop it and then come back later once you've watched this movie. The film centers around this female played by Johansson. I think her name might be Laura, but I've seen this movie a couple times and I can't remember it actually saying her name during the film, but either way, that's what she's billed as. So she's seemingly an alien species that comes to Earth to either feed or study humans. She's preying upon the most unsuspecting horny dudes.
You know what? I'm all in. You're all in. Did you say what's one drink?
There is also what I believe is another one of her species in a masculine form that races around on a street bike. He's either covering up her kidnappings or brutally tying up loose ends. It's a nice juxtaposition. Biker character is there just to get the job done. You have Scarlett Johansson's character kind of starts out the film that way until her character kind of evolves or de-evolves. It's actually very formulaic and sometimes, albeit repetitive, structure to this film. She happens upon some poor lonely sod with a heart on, lures him back to her lair. She gets undressed, they get undressed, they sink into a pool of some sort of ichor liquid which preserves them until they implode and their fluids get sucked out in some kind of vacuum processing apparatus, conveyor belt type thing. She gets these men into her car and she lures them in with her just raw sex appeal. She's just Scarlett Johansson, and you know, she uses that to her advantage to get these guys to kind of jump in the car with her. And it, you know, for a while it seems like she's targeting a certain type of person, you know, a lonely kind of dude walking on the side of the road, a little incel-y sometimes. It's certainly the case for some of them. That is until she happens on a family on the beach. It's this husband and this wife and their baby, and the wife goes out in the water and starts to drown. So the husband leaves their small baby on the shore to try to save her. Another swimmer comes along and kind of, he's already in a wetsuit and he gets out of the water and he starts kind of trying to spit game at Scarlett Johansson's character. However, he sees this family struggling, and so he goes and tries to save them. He winds up being able to save just the husband and briefly, and he takes him to the shore. His husband's like probably fighting the whole way. There's a big strong current. Also, you know, he's trying to get to his wife. The wife's probably already drowned at this point, and the husband just kind of gets up, abandons their baby, and jumps right back in the water and drowns, essentially. This part of the film was a reveal for Scarlett Johansson's character, where this goes to show that she's not a villain, she's not a hero, not making the streets of Scotland better by taking out all the incels at night. Picks up a rock and smacks the would-be savior's, you know, head with it and takes him back and kills him. It just goes to show you the lack of humanity within her character. Because at first I'm like, oh, she's killing a certain type, you know. There's almost a tinge of like, oh, these guys could be like predatory. But this guy was literally just trying to save this family, and she kills him in an unfeeling and cold manner, just like she would kill all the rest of them. Even to the point where she's dragging him off the beach, kind of leaves this like crying, newly orphaned infant on the waterfront to die. Which again, it shows you the unfeelingness of the species as a whole, because the biker shows up on the beach at night, takes all the clothes, you know, kind of ties up those loose ends, and the baby is still, you know, on the beach, just bawling its eyes out with no parents, and obviously, you know, relegated to a horrible fate. They both are very cold and calculating. That isn't to the point where we meet the man with the tumors on his face, played brilliantly and fucking bravely, I might add, by Adam Pearson. It seems that this is another turning point for the character. She starts relating to this person where he has these physical deformities. Yes, he seems human, but he also has an inhuman quality to him that she kind of relates to. So it goes with the same formula. At first, she takes him back to the lair. He sinks in the pool of goo, you know, but then she's like walking down the stairs and leaving until she like happens upon herself in the mirror. And that's when you start to think, okay, the more time she spends in this body, the more connected to humanity and those type of emotions and what it means to be human starts to set in for her. So she actually lets him go, which, you know, only for him to kind of walk home naked and then get picked up by the biker, probably to a grisly fate later on off camera. And the third act is really all about that, is her attempt to experience what being human means in less of a cold, like, scientific, surgical way of, you know, literally consuming humans to learn about them, you know, I guess from the inside out. She shifts that focus into more like a spiritual, even emotional focus. But unfortunately, she fails because she's just not capable of just basic human functions. She tries to eat like a delicious pie, maybe another nod to David Lynch, where she like almost yaks it up immediately. can't make love. Like, there's this whole little subplot, which the first time I watched it was probably the part that sagged the most. But the more I watched this movie, I really like this part of the film in the third act, where she just meets this guy who is, kind of takes her under his wing. He brings her home. He makes her food. He gives her a room. And it seems like no strings attached. He doesn't expect anything from her, which she kind of either mistakes or is just trying to experience what caring for someone else feels like, to the point where it almost seems like she might have tricked herself. And that's just like a really tragic scene where she decides to actually make love with this man, and she just anatomically cannot, because she's just like a lump of coal with a skin suit on. She doesn't have any of the equipment downstairs. The ending of this film is tragic and gross and brutal, certainly, but it also kind of proverbially hits you over the head with the notion that humans are the real monsters, and even though we can feel these emotions and we take all these things for granted, we choose not to, because we have all these opportunities, and really we're just locusts and we're just predators, and we just destroy anything that we don't know and that we don't consider to be normal, or that we do. Like, there's a very brutal scene at the end with a attempt sexual assault, but then kind of ends in a really sad way with a really disturbing message. And like I said, it is brutal the way it ends, but also it seems like the correct inevitable conclusion for a film like this. Plays on a lot of themes: consumerism and class, what it means to be human, and what humanity really means, and the fact that we make, as a species, a conscious effort to destroy our environments and destroy the people around us. So it's definitely not like a cheery, Sunday afternoon watch. It's definitely a mood. Speaking of a mood, this movie is more something of a sensory experience than a linear narrative. So if you need, your plot to go from A to B to C to Z, this is not it. This is like the cinematic equivalent to sitting in a massage chair. There are long shots of her driving around in the night in the streets of Scotland with no dialogue, which I mentioned before, which really allows you to settle in, and it transports you inside the film. You could smell the rain on the street as much as you can see it and hear it. The score by Michael Lewis was dubbed as the second greatest film score of all time by Pitchfork. It is definitely a major character in this film, does most of the heavy lifting, especially with so many scenes of prolonged quietness and no dialogue. It also has kind of a recurring theme song, which you wouldn't kind of guess in a movie like this. It devolves into less of a musical score as the movie goes on, and more of just like tones, but it does have like a reoccurring theme song, which is pretty neat, and it just fits the bill so well. It's almost like her hunting song. And this is not to mention just the raw sound design of this film. It's just something that everyone that loves movies needs to experience at least once. It's really reminiscent of Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey and like episode 8 of David Lynch's Twin Peaks: The Return. It has this like weird slight static that almost like tickles your ear, almost like muffled quality to it. It sounds like someone's like sitting on a speaker or something. It's like you went swimming and then you have water in your ear. It almost like it makes your ears tickle, but it's so bizarre, but it's absolutely brilliant. Like everything just sounds so otherworldly and strange, and that's what really reminds you that you're watching a science fiction film. And the last major character is the film's diverse setting. To the dingy back streets of the gorgeous, picturesque countryside, like Glazer and cinematographer Daniel Landon put on an absolute clinic in visual storytelling. It's similar to other filmmakers like Yorgos Lanthimos and Alejandro Iñárritu, which is kind of funny because when I watch this film and I think of those two filmmakers, I obviously think of The Revenant with all the nature, and it feels very cold, and you almost want to put a jacket on. Everything's wet and rainy and green, and it has this like crispness to it, but also feels like the movie The Lobster when they're out in the woods. It feels very Yorgos Lanthimos-esque as far as just the cinematography goes, which is also to say those two filmmakers feel very Kubrickian. That's your jam. If like Kubrick and Lynch and all these things, those more, you know, offbeat, non-linear storytellers are your jam, then this is right up your alley. In closing, if you're just looking for a 90-minute kind of movie that you could really get subversive with, that you could really just, but not get lost at all. This is not a hard to follow film. It has a very straightforward story and message, and it doesn't feel pretentious. It's not trying to be show-offy or flashy, and there's no fat in the film. It allows you to get lost in the scenes with a beautiful setting, just phenomenal sound design, unlike anything else, like world-class sound design, and a score that just absolutely fucks on every level. As far as recommending this film goes, I think Under the Skin is a must-watch. So thank you so much for joining us here on The Cult of Films. I'm John the Host. You could follow me at John the Host on Twitter. You could also follow this very show at The Cult of Films. You could download this in podcast form as well on all your favorite podcasting sites like iTunes and Spotify. Leave us ratings and reviews, please. That helps out a lot. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.